Hey, good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Brian Boardman. I lead IBM's federal Salesforce practice here, based here in Washington, D.C., and have been part of the broader kind of CRM ecosystem for the better part of 25 plus years. Appreciate the time today. As Haley mentioned, we're really here to chat about the two concepts of really the user experience design and really security and how they are nested together. And so in most of the cases when I speak with many of the clients I work with, it really starts at the heart of telling a great story for them. And whether this is a federal agency, which is again where I tend to spend most of my time, or if it happens to be with a commercial client, and yes, I have spent not all 25 years here in federal, but most of it was over in life sciences and healthcare. It all starts with imagining and creating something that is really impactful. But the experiences that we drive have to be measurable by the outcomes in which we're trying to produce. As we start to think about this, really from a building and integrating and really securing all the applications that we've had over the years, what we really need to start to think about, again, as our cloud computing starts to become more and more prevalent, is how we have this connected cognitive enterprise. And that cognitive enterprise deals with everything from our people to our applications to really that infrastructure and how things all stay connected together. So really, let's kind of start, because there were three words on that last slide that really had a lot of meaning for how I look at, engaging with my clients every day. And one was experiences, the second were outcomes, and the third is around that cognitive enterprise. When I think about business outcomes, most people, who start with consultants always think, oh, really, normal consulting needs on that. But in all honesty, my whole focus, again, is really in Salesforce. It's about building applications. And here for the federal government, we do a lot on application modernization, taking applications that you would think of, candidly, we would think about it, would come off of old or previous, maybe CRM or ERP systems. I kid you not, some cases, these are coming out of Access databases, Paradox databases, or Excel spreadsheets. And so when we chat with various agencies and people, it's really about helping them to understand the value of the outcome. And that outcome can be seen in any number of different ways. And sometimes you just need a couple examples. So off on the right-hand side of that, it's around when, think about it from a citizen's perspective or a customer's perspective. Each one of these has a quote. And in this particular case, this particular customer needs that interaction that, you've known me, you've seen me, whether I'm in one channel or another, recognize me for who I am. We've seen a lot of these examples today on really how companies like Apple or Amazon start to really treat us, and they really get to know us regardless of how we interact. That first call resolution, that first time of being experienced things, that's what the generations and the consumers of today expect. The other one is really around citizen satisfaction or customer satisfaction, and how we improve citizens' experiences and drive better policies and services for all of our interactions. You can go and look and you can see employee engagement. Our employees, it's not just about taking a call. It's not just about making that next deal or closing that next deal. They actually really want to have all of the relevant information as it relates to a client or a citizen in this case, and be able to make decisions quickly. When we used to come up with some of the reporting tools and we got graphical with it, that stuff was awesome on it. Now we want those same sort of graphs and dashboards to be cognitive, but we always have to be aware of PII and other potential data breaches and making sure we don't give up too much information. And then finally, it's around the operational efficiencies. If we're not going ahead and making things better and faster to improve, reducing the number of clicks or, reducing the number of steps in the process, it really starts to, bog down. We're just really going ahead and doing a lift and a shift of an application in its development. So keeping some of these in mind, they're just examples about how we like to drive those outcomes for the future and for our clients. The second one is, I'm sure many of you guys are aware, after just coming through COVID, delivering this on this virtual environment is something that many of us kind of whipped through very, very quickly when the pandemic first hit. As I'm sure as many of you guys are here from a security point of view, you also realize that some of the most salient people out in the world may not have been, the most ethical, and knew kind of that companies that are going virtual that are required to kind of go virtual in order to kind of sustain themselves, this created a huge opportunity for them, especially from a security point of view. Even today, in 2022, we are still seeing over a 400% increase in the security threats from both foreign and domestic attacks. Whether they actually make a breach or they're just making these attacks, this is the last data point that I had seen, and it's tremendous. The technology and businesses have converged here across the enterprise, and we're trying to build these experiences both with the cloud and AI, but the security element of this is really the enabling and fundamental protocol as to what all of us need to be considering. It's the foundation for any good application, is you need to start with both that infrastructure, and as soon as you have that infrastructure enabled, whether it's cloud or other, the first thing that's got to come up is how, of course, we're going to protect ourselves from the unauthenticated or the people that we don't want. This virtual environment, let me kind of pause here for a moment, because while I said earlier that many of us kind of stood these up quickly, we've begun, over the last 2 years, we've done a great job in hardening this. We've kind of plugged a lot of the leaks that we had. We've made them much more sustainable. We've had them be much more respondent. And this is really, as we start to look to that next evolution of this, of the virtual enterprise, we're quickly realizing that many people aren't looking to come back. Some of us are looking to kind of get them back in a few days a week, but having that virtual enterprise is going to continue to be something as a standard way of doing business going forward for our employees and candidly for some of our customers. But just because it's going to be that new model, that virtual enterprise, this should become something that is to your strategic benefit, because it combines the concept of innovation with your ecosystem of both employees, partners, and clients. And so this can provide you guys with a huge leg up in looking at how, of course, we leverage technology and collaborative tools to help deliver differentiation and value to our customers. When we start to look at this, again, there's a couple other metrics that are there, about how we're reducing the number of manual reporting elements, about how, of course, we're increasing the time to respond to our citizens, about how we're reducing legacy sort of case management systems, or even about how we can have speed to market. Speed to market is always the thing that's at the forefront of any organization whether we're building new product, we're building new applications, or we're building new channels to serve, or we're simply refreshing them. That speed to market is essential, and that virtual environment hasn't been able to slow us down. It's actually helping us move forward. When we start to think about that, we start to look at, as I mentioned just a moment ago, channels. And channels, you can look at this, and Salesforce does a phenomenal job at having a true multi-channel platform. I'm going to focus in on that service side of it versus the sales side of it. And because I think that on that sales and the marketing side of it, we get a lot of that. Where it doesn't really come in as much to play is in the service side of the organization. And the service side of the organization of tomorrow is really quite unique. It has the most dependencies on securities, on single sign-on, on validation and authentication than most other areas. Because as you see here in this graphic to the right, we're really blending in lots of other components. And whether you want to call these components capabilities or channels, when I think about these, they're all channels to me. Because whether or not someone picks up the phone and calls me, whether or not they're going on the website and they're trying to reach me, whether they're going via a commerce, whether a brick and mortar or e-commerce model, whether it's coming in via social media, chatbots, what have you, they're all different channels. Other people have argued it with me for different ways, and certainly I, always listen to people and try and see their point of view on it. But this dynamic model about the service center of tomorrow is actually bringing all of these together. And when we start to think about the modernization approach, because candidly, a lot of us had built various components of CRM, that customer relationship management components, much earlier and have evolved over time. And some of us have gone ahead and even built in this one arm of the service channel, each of these other individual mini channels independently as well. That convergence of bringing them together and having them all either stay on the same platform or really kind of start to be in one platform. It's great when we start to go ahead and bring them together in a consistent model. And whether or not you're looking at this really from the IT department side of the house or the business side of the house or the security side of the house. When the business is looking at how we revolutionize and change up how we provide services in the future, what we first like to talk to them about the most is two things. One is having a human-centered design. And human-centered design really, as we think about it, it's putting the person who's going to be interacting with the applications in the center and building everything else around them, not kind of building the apps and having them kind of be served by the apps, but it's a different methodology. It's a different way of thinking about this. In concert with our human-centered design, the other part that we always look at today is around the AI, the artificial intelligence to it. And there's two parts that we need to be concerned about for this. And one is how, of course, we're developing modern applications, thinking about our customers, about our citizens, about our employees, really at that center, but also about how we can help use automation to reduce the burden of the workflows of yesteryear that had multiple steps, multiple validations, multiple different means of logging on from one system to another, and really providing a really smooth means and a quicker way to render data and provide people the right information at the right time, and maybe even filling in things for them. You think about this today, and the really easiest way to think about it is when you go on your phone and, for those of us that, have a hard time seeing that screen, and you guys are looking to kind of do a new app and you're looking to buy something on a new website, knowing that, when you kind of get out to the checkout point and you can just start typing your first name and they autofill for all of your information kind of pops in there, and that credit card can also be entered in very quickly. And all you really need to do is provide the access or the security code onto it for that verification and validation. That's the means about what we're trying to do as making things easier, but not just here on the commercial websites, but really on the B2B side of it. And as I mentioned, as we start to think about that human-centered design, having that smooth security validation and the handoffs between the back offices and your customer-facing applications are essential. It also poses the biggest area of breach for any secure environment. It's one thing to kind of have them kind of come into just a general service or kind of getting general information. It's another thing when you start allowing them to touch your back office ERP systems for placing orders and for rendering other information that's salient in ERP. You want to make sure that no one can really go ahead and break or provide any type of malware into those back environments via an upload into a previous kind of front end application. So those definitely need to be taken into consideration. So as I kind of look here at time, we want to make sure that we kind of move on, because the real important parts on that user experience and the design of things is really on the next few slides here. And for me, when we look at these are, value-driven approaches to engineering how enterprises work and experiences in the world. And you sort of break these down into 4 general areas. And when I'm designing an application, we think about things, or even before you start to kind of put pen to paper, air quotes around that paper part for that application, before we develop any line of code or anything else, you kind of categorize things into these 4 areas, which are, what are the core principles? And when you think about principles, it's around your color palette, it's your topography, it's your iconography, it's that consistency that meets up with your brand. The second one, again, from the experience point of view, is around the patterns on how things are done. How many drop downs, how many test fields do you need? How many validations are out there? What do the buttons look like? What are the shapes, sizes, and colors? And again, we look at this also through that lens of accessibility as well. And finally, you kind of get into the last 2, which are the login screens. And while it's a login screen, this is really dealing with the forms, the templates, the auto correspondence, the tables that are really there. Are they visible, easy to use? And how much data do we really need to enter versus what can be auto-entered? And finally, as you kind of start to think about those other elements and patterns of your application, that last column here is really the most important. As you think about at the beginning, you try and think about, well, our end goal is to kind of get this out by X date. Well, how are you guys doing that? How is that MVP? How are you going to get that rapid kind of prototype out there? What does a pilot look like? What do best practices look like for doing a soft release, doing a limited kind of release, to making sure that the applications are fully tested and vetted? Because candidly, UAT is great for all things, but there's no possibility of testing every parameter, every variable means before you kind of release and having hundreds of thousands of users really hit your applications and or your new websites. So making sure that you kind of have that approach defined well out in front helps you guys build over what your plan is going to look like. So really candidly here, the best practices for security and intuitive experiences on this framework, I try and think of it again, try and take this one step deeper. If we go back from the previous scheme and we're looking here at the principles and the patterns, to me, I kind of bring that out and it kind of breaks down into 4 other areas. It's the heuristics, it's the design principles, it's having a cognitive bias for certain things, and it's about safety. And again, all of this is in that context of your customer, your citizens, that humans at the center of things. And so heuristics, we're going to go into this a bit more on another slide. It's one right after this. But this is that consistent navigation. And many times when clients have asked me, well, what are the top 5 best practices for building an application? They're not necessarily looking for what were the best practices for the design of how we all will be working together. They're really looking for the examples of how do you have consistent layouts? How is there clear, messaging on the field on the application screen? What does it look like when we move this to mobile? How do we minimize the number of clicks and the number of scrolling that has to be done? And when we start to do a lot of this on, sprint 1 or sprint 2, when we try and really get out there, we start to show the applications that's being developed, that continual feedback and looking at things and sharing about these heuristics in mind, these are the salient parts, because the first few releases of what comes out, many of us are really trying to get the business requirements done very, very quickly to kind of get something for anyone to respond to. Going back and having, before these kind of release out to customers, going back and reviewing your heuristics on how you can improve that UI, how you improve things, even if you've had this at the forefront, is really essential to doing great application development and great user experience. And again, you start to look at things from a design principle. And when we design things up front and throughout the program, security is not something that we think about up front and we think about it just once. Salesforce does a phenomenal job for us about really going ahead and taking care of a lot of the security elements, as we just heard from the previous speaker. But a lot of those things, you need to continually think of it each step along the way. And whether or not that's from your Experience Cloud and someone coming in and logging something in, or going into a Service Cloud or a Sales Cloud or what have you, or that Marketing Cloud, people responding from an email, how do you have that continued secure, and how do you continue to have the trust of your recipients to know that when they do click that, they're not downloading something bad, right? So these design principles and keeping that security in mind and how people will respond is a great way to think about things up front in your design. There's a couple of other points here that are out there that are really quite natural, but one of them that is always a pet peeve of mine is white space. White space is just as important as content, and the applications of yesteryear where there was just like so much white space versus overcrowding something, that right balance is essential to looking at how things are spaced out and evenly shown with colors and graphics and icons and photos. So try not to kind of go overboard with kind of making it too sparse or too crowded. And finally, as we kind of go into the last elements here, is this cognitive, bias. It's having that sentiment based on ends as more than the means for something. But when I start to look at it, it's really looking at the AI ethics that is essential for what we're trying to do. As we kind of bring things back to the beginning of our presentation, we said the 2 big elements about driving a great experience and building a great application around keeping your customers centered up front and enabling a lot of the AI to help with the mundane and the monotonous and reducing the number of clicks in the previous workflows. In order to have the great AI that you want, a lot of it does require training. I mean, it's training the AI based on data sets, but it's making sure that while you're training and you're looking at that in UAT and others, is you want to make sure that the training sets that you've used don't have a bias for one behavior or another, or trying to leave other people out. This AI ethics part is a huge part. As many of you know, IBM does have this product called Watson Health or Watson at Large, where it does do a lot of our AI that we embed in both our Salesforce applications or standalone. But before we start any of these programs, each program, each statement of work of what we're trying to do has to go through the AI ethics board. If you guys don't have one of those today, I strongly encourage you. If you guys don't want to have one in your own organization, there are AI ethics boards out in the open market as third-party groups, and they will certainly try and help give you the right coaching counseling to make sure that what you're trying to build doesn't have any bias towards any individual pattern or any individuals out in the open market. And so, as I mentioned, I did want to drill down a little bit more on the heuristics. I know this is a bit of an eyesore. It's kind of the oxymoron to this, the topic that's on the slide about making things that, you're not overcrowding, you're not using, too much white space, and making sure that you've got the right fonts and stuff. I wanted to make sure I actually provided the slide for all of you guys. This is a great type of slide for you guys to go back and reference in thinking about these heuristic principles as you're building out your applications. I'll draw your attention to one of the really cool aspects of this, which is sort of at the bottom left. It's around Hicks' law. And Hicks' law really comes in and it talks about the number of options for increasing so that things don't amount in time it takes to make a decision. There's a whole website that's out here on this particular one. In between Googling, heuristic principles and Hicks' laws together, I learned a great deal over the last couple of years as to what to do and what not to do. So kind of encourage you guys all to go and do that as your homework after the conference today. And then finally, I wanted to wrap up to share with you guys just an example. So IBM, we work with a number of clients all around the world on lots of things, and how we start to pull all this together is really, the part that makes things sort of special about how we meet with our clients. And I'm going to share this example because we started to do this for one of our Department of Defense clients here in the US, where we started with a human-centered approach. And I know most of us look, at slides and we start to read from the, top left to going down that column, and then we kind of go to the middle and we kind of go back to that top and we go down. Honestly, guys, in this particular slide, I encourage you all to start in the top right corner, where we're looking at this persona-driven event. And each one of the personas that we had thought of for this client, this is before we even talked to a single client or before we even did anything about a wireframe or an application or looking at all that stuff. We thought about that human-centered design and what were the people that we really were going to be interacting with, and what were their needs and what were their pain points. And we start to kind of keep them in mind. We put these 4 different personas all around the room for all of our developers and everyone on the entire team to keep them in mind. So as we start to build out this new app, it kind of goes over to now the top middle column, where we start to go ahead and we start to use the murals, and we started to use the whiteboards, and we started to use wireframes. And then we start to kind of, again, use this whole JAD session about what it is that these user stories, what is the problems that we're trying to solve, how are they using their applications today, and try to flesh something out a bit more. Again, going back to this whole virtual enterprise and what we were working with and what were mentioned before, these can all be done through remote teams. And you see the little logo here, the little M that stands for Mural, happens to be one of the tools that we use on a regular basis, both in our design and our build sessions, to really share collaboratively with large teams or small teams, but they are geographically diverse. And everyone, instead of standing up at a whiteboard, we can pop right onto Mural and we can put sticky notes, we can do writing on there, we can pop up graphics and icons, and it really helps to collaborate with everyone all at once. And it's a great design tool. It's also great for other means as well. But as you can see, we're able to kind of lay out the various processes, keeping our people in mind, and then get user feedback instantaneously. We did this collaboratively again with clients, and then we kind of took that to the next step after we kind of had the JAD sessions and we mapped things out, and we went down and brought in all those experience design elements that we just went through around those heuristics, around the design principles, and we started to bring together each of the wireframes that we would build as to mock-ups of how each of the application screens would go. Again, going back and getting feedback, making sure that we've got all the right typography and iconography and pictures all consistent. And then ultimately, you get to the bottom right of these new applications that we built and we pushed out. And again, whether they're rendered on the laptops or the websites or mobile devices, it all seemed to pull things together. And how we did this particular program, this is done in roughly 30 days from start to end. And what it did was it took up about 3 or 4 months of application development out of the process. So I'll pause there for you guys, see if there are any questions. I want to try and make sure I did my best to try and stay on time for you all. But let me pause there and see if anyone's got questions on some of the prior slides.
Thank you, Brian. Let's see what we got here. So one question that we have is that you mentioned Salesforce as the application that helps drive customer experience. Are there any other tools or platforms you use to help facilitate?
Yeah, thanks, Haley. So yeah, there are. So my personal practice, all I do day in and day out is I just work on clients that are trying to deploy Salesforce. But in today's world, really this agility layer of how do we provide other applications? There are a ton that are out there. I've worked with products like Microsoft. I've worked with others that are kind of leading forward right now, like Appian. Adobe does a fantastic job with some of their experiences and some of their modern applications that they're putting forward. I think that there is a lot that's out there, and based on what you're trying to achieve, we could certainly help you look at any number of different platforms and really make the best decision for what you're trying to do.
All right. And then one last question. You seem to focus on federal clients. Can the same principles be used for commercial clients? And have you ever done this type of work?
Yeah. And thanks. That's great. And like I said, I deal day in and day out here in federal. Most of us, Salesforce, as you see, many of you guys are probably using Salesforce today in the commercial space. I spent almost 20 years in pharmaceuticals and biotech and life sciences, and we were using the same sort of applications. So it really is something that you guys can use regardless of industry. I've given some of the examples today here in the federal world, but guys, the same principles apply whether you're doing it for a federal client, or you're doing it for a financial services client, or you're doing it for retail and banking.
All right, amazing. I think that's the last one we're going to take. We will send any unanswered questions along to you, Brian. Thank you again. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.